In this ever-changing, chaotic world, we might be asking, how can peace be achieved? And while making this search, our social psychologists have focused on 4 peacemaking strategies. And it can be also remembered as the 4 C's of peacemaking. The 4 C's are contact, cooperation, communication, and conciliation. So first, we're going to discuss about contact. So in contact, we already know what contact really is, right? Like contact, like making a close contact to that person, like making a relationship, somehow a good relationship. But contact comes with 2 different sides. It can be a negative and a positive side. So for example, like you're going to put 2 conflict individuals together into close contact, and you might be thinking that they might be able to know each other and perhaps like each other. But yeah, we already know that that's complicated, especially when their attitudes towards each other is not really that good. But we have also seen that the proximity and the accompanying interaction, anticipation, and interaction, and a mere exposure boost liking. So it can have 2 sides. It can be positive and negative. Like if they are in a negative relationship or they are in conflict, like they need first to solve the conflict before they can make a close contact with each other. In contact, there are questions being asked. Let's go back to contact, because our attitudes really follow our behavior. So whatever comes into our attitudes really shows in our behavior towards that person. For example, so imong ataw is dili kayo maayo, like imong tagad is plastic na inana. Let's go to the first question in contact. Does contact predict attitudes? Perhaps it does predict attitudes. Like for example, the more friendly contact the blacks and white Americans have within one another, the better attitudes they have to one another. Like for example, like a straight person like me have more contacts with gays and lesbians. The more I have contact with them, the more I became to be accepting them for who they are and who matters. In the study, 94% of studies increased that contact predicted decreased prejudice. As desegregation improved racial attitudes. These studies like Morton DeTort and Mary Collins took advantage of the made-to-order natural experiment. In this study, like in that New York apartment, like regardless of what are their races in life, they can still live that apartment, like in that certain apartment. Whereas in Newark, New Jersey, wherein there are separate apartments from the black Americans and the white Americans. They have a separate building. For example, black American here, white American here. So like in that exaggerated stereotypes, they really have the like after that experiment, they interviewed a white woman, and then it comes out that the white women in the desegregated development were far more likely to favor interracial housing and to say their attitudes towards black had improved. Exaggerated stereotypes had wilted in the face of reality, as a woman puts as, "I've really come to like it. I see they are just human as we are." So like like ato ang racial stereotypes like, but the more you have to contact with it, the more you become like the more you know about the person, the more you like the person. Next question is, when does desegregation improve racial attitudes? So kanus amad jud mo improve ato ang racial attitudes. So, the same self-imposed segregation was evident in the South Africa desegregated beach, as John Dixon and Kevin Dorham discovered when they recorded the location. Black and white and Indian beachgoers one midsummer in the afternoon. In this, they observe like sa kana nga specific nga beach resort, ilahang nabantayan na nganong gatapok-tapok og lahi-lahi every races. Like for example, Black Americans here, white Americans, Indians people. So ang question there, when does the segregation improve racial attitudes? Like like question 1, and then it answered na like it was supposed to be like mixing, but there was very little mixing. It wasn't because we didn't want to, but it just really awkward. Pluralistic ignorance.
You can see in the context, like in the questions, you can see the pattern that they are making friendship
towards each other. So the question is, how does intergroup contact
reduce
this? So 4 bulleted down there. As you can see, first is we have to reducing the anxiety. Like let's reduce the anxiety, because the more contact brings greater comfort. Increasing empathy. We already know that empathy is putting oneself in other shoes. So like once you're making contact, you have to do the empathy also. Like di mga pwede mo judge niya directly. You have to be empathic about what or she felt of, because we have different feelings, man. We have different attitudes towards a situation. So we have to understand that we are a unique social individuals. Next is enhancing knowledge. Enhancing knowledge is enable people to discover their similarities. Like we have to enhance our knowledge to that specific person, or to the other person, or to the other culture. Their culture, we have to discover our similarities in that culture, our differences. We have to acknowledge those things, and we have to meld in those things. Race, their culture, their attitudes, their behavior, anything. Tracing perceived threats, alleviating overblown fears, and increased trust. So, kaning last is dili na nato mabuhat if dili mo reduce ang atong anxiety. Sige tagunahon na nga, what if i-betray ko niya, what if like if we perceived threats, like if for example, what if mo trust na lang kaniya, and if i broke niya mo iyang trust, then that would be a lesson learned for you nga okay, dili siya trusted jud na pagkatao. Like dili na ako siya i-trust the next time around. So like inana, but dili man pud pwede nga wala tay salig sa usag-usa. Dili pud na, like for example, i-meet up na to kay dili man jud ta mo share tanan nato. Like ato ara man siyang ipakita is unsay atong ganahan makita nila nato. So next is we have the group salience rather. The group salience, to reduce the group salience is also
bridges divides between people.
So ang group salience is when you recognize yourself that you're in that group. Like mag-think ka unsay good ana nga group, dili lang as an individual ba, dili lang ka individualistic, kundi kuan po ka sa group. To reduce prejudice and conflict, we had best initially minimize group diversity, then acknowledge it, and then transcend it. So you have the equal status contact. Equal status contact, like in making contacts, dili man jud ta pwede like magbasta-basta lang. If ang katubang na to ang teacher, ato di siya i-treat as like our how we treat our best friends, like magkiat-kiat data nga naa siya, di ba? Dili make contacts in a person wherein ka-level nimo siya ba, like you have the same level, you have the same status in life, not really the same, but at least duol mo sa duha ba. Okay, if basin if kuan ba, basin if dili mo duol kay layo kay mo, tapos nakig-make contact ka, tapos imong pag-make contact kay kanang somehow murag jolly ka ayo niya. Siya kay na-offended siya, kay sensitive siya. Nya, nag-hold siya og power. So basically dili mo ka level. So mo na nga magka-conflict na naman mo. So in order to create contacts, you must have an equal status contact. Next is cooperation. By the time their hostility was strong, that mere contact only provided opportunities for taunts and attacks. When an eagle bombed by a rattler, and his fellow eagles urged him to brush off the dirt, disintegrating the two groups hardly promoted their social integration. Ang ganing nga experiment is after sa competition sa eagles versus rattlers, iyang gi-brought together ang group into a non-competitive activities and like such as watching TVs, eating together, and then abi niya like okay na ana like sa katong Muzaffar Sharif naka-trigger sa alang competitiveness, like they are still competing with each other. Now, so they found out that equal status contact can help, but sometimes it is not enough. Like for example, dili ra Japon enough nga equal status contact ato ang buhaton. So we have to do some cooperation also. So cooperation, in the first cooperation, we have the common external threats build cohesiveness. So the common external threats built in cohesiveness is having a common enemy unify the group of a competing boy in Sharif camping experiments and in many subsequent experiments. Sa katong experiment tani nga, like if they have shared predicaments, mo trigger ilahang predicaments, mo trigger ilang cooperation. Same sa pag-pandemic, nag-trigger man to og threats sa to, although naay mga tao gyapon na wala ni tuo ato nga na ay COVID ana unsa na diha lang pang yaw-yaw ana, but some of us naminaw Japon, nag-wear pa Japon face mask, nagkuan Japon ta, nagsunod Japon ta sa rules, sa social distancing ni ang mga doctors nga na-work on na to ana, like naaday mga threats sa external daw kay mo cooperate daw ta. Next, we have the external threats build internal unity. In 1987, U.S. President Ronald Reagan observed that in obsession with antagonism, the moment we often forgot how much unity is all the member of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to recognize the common bond. Like for example, kato, pandemic, diba? Like mostly sa mga families yun ato is like broken. Bon ba to is like wala sila communication kay sige sila og cellphones na. So like tungod ato ang pandemic, like nag-bridge siya og internal unity sa ato sa ato usa ka family nga magtinabangay ta nga, for example, para di na magkutman, like magtinabangay ta, mag-usa ta, like online selling, mamaligya ka para makakwarta, then makapalit mong food. So wala siya.
Next is we have the subordinate goal.
Foster cooperation. Closely related, the unifying power of an external threat is the unifying power of a superordinate goals that unite in all the group and require cooperation effort. To promote harmony among his warning campers, Sharif introduced such goal. Ang kaning such goal kaning sa study nga ni Sharif, iyang ning gibuhat, like nibuhat siya og problem sa camp water supply and necessities, and cooperate sila para ma-restore ang water supply. So like sa given opportunity, nag-grant siya og movies expensive enough to require joint resource of the two groups, and they cooperated when the truck broke down daw. Naguba ang truck, dili na siya mo function, dili na siya mo under, dili na siya go through, dili na siya continue sa ilang journey. And ang one staff member nila kay iyang gibilin ang tug of war rope, like nakakita ang katong isa kalalaki nga niya ni suggest siya nga i-pull nila ang katuang truck while playing tug of war against the truck, like ilang ihigot ang katong higot sa truck and then ilang birahon para moandar. So i-cooperate sila kay tungod pareha man sila og kanang goal, pareha man sila og need that time nga they need to nga moandar ang truck para ma-continue sila sa ilang journey. So ang subordinate goal is a shared goal that necessitates cooperation effort, a goal that overrides people differences from one another. So ang kanang subordinate goal is like ang goal ninyo sa usa ka group ba nga way nga makuha ninyo ang inyong goal. Next is cooperative learning improves racial attitudes. So one experiment, white youth or 2 or 3 week outward bond expeditions involving intimate contact expressed improved attitudes towards black month after if they had been randomly assigned expedition group. And also, like in another research led by Elliot Arson, they make a 6-member groups, and then ang 6-member groups kay ilang kitagaan og topic nga in which kay baw sila if nga ilahan ng kanang murag master nga ng topic. Say for example, master siya sa history, yan ang gihatag niya, and master siya sa geography, and so on and so forth. Muna ang katoang jigsaw technique. After gihatag nila ang kanang every topic, gipastorya sila dito sa piece of a jigsaw. And once nagstorya sila ang katong mga self-confident student kay naminaw sila sa iyang gipang storya, and naka-realize sila nga napamukoy madungag ana iyang mastorya o ana ba. Naa sila new learning at the same time na sila stock knowledge, like for example ma-improve pa nila ilang knowledge pa towards that certain topic. Ang cooperation learning kay ma-improve siya sa atong racial attitudes, like magkahiusa man pud ta kay like mudawat man ta sa iyang opinion, diha ta may gidawat iyang opinion sa katuyang gisulti sa jigsaw, and then if imo na siya isulti ang imong mapuno niya maghinatagan man mo og iya nga naa ana nga topic. With cooperative learning, students learn not only a material but other lesson, like as what Salvin and Copper said. So next we go to the interracial cooperation. On athletic teams in class project and extracurricular activities meets different and improves racial attitudes. Like ang athletic teams, like regarded sa ilang race, they still have this one goals and nagkayuso sila to reach that goals in which winning the competition of the game. Next is we have the group and subordinate identities. So in everyday life, we often reconcile multiple identities. We acknowledge subgroup identity and then transcend it. Subgroup identity is like as a parent, as a child, as a student, and ang superordinate identity is like as a family. Being mindful of our multiple social identities enables social cohesion. I am many things, some of which you are too. Like for example, daghan ka og naibawan pero naapod siya naibawan nga pareha mo, like may similarities ba. But in ethically diverse culture, how do people balance their ethnic identities with their national identities? They may have a cultural or omnicultural identity, one that identifies both the larger culture, one's own ethnic and religious culture. So here's some research. I've wondered if whether a pride is one of the group compete. Kung ba daw ang pride mo ang group mag-competes sa ilang identification with the larger group culture. We evaluate ourselves partly in terms of our social identities, like ato i-evaluate ato ang self based ato ang mga social identities. Seeing our own group, our schools, our employer, our family, our race, our nation as good help us to feel good about ourselves. Like a positive ethnic identity can therefore be contribute a positive self-esteem. So a positive mainstream culture identity, marginal people who have neither a strong ethnic nor a strong mainstream cultural identity often have a low esteem. Bicultural people kuno who affirm both identities typically have a strong positive self-concept. Often they alternate between their two cultures, adapting with their language and behavior whichever group they are with. Bicultural people is maka-adapt pa siya sa culture, like maka-adjust siya na yung base sa culture nga naa siya. To end with my part, I will leave this that you can make contact while competing, but you can't make cooperation. You can't do cooperation while competing with each other.